Yeah, we're working on. Actually, that's the umbrella, the catastrophism. But it's what goes down within the catastrophisms. The artifacts, layers, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of the umbrella of the. And each one is a different kind of segment.
So this is episode 2.
Yeah, this is episode 2.
Okay, sounds great. I'm going to let you guys go right ahead.
Okay. Well, thanks, Bobby. Really appreciate it. I put this together here, and we want to thank you, PFRN. And I want to welcome everybody back to the USOKS Global Campfire Chats. The campfires have evolved from the grassroots independent researchers that I connected through Facebook groups from around the planet. And I founded it in 2008 in the hopes that the USOKS would evolve into a group on Facebook that could present real-time historical information and link it together to create an image of what the deep past was really like, and maybe along the way find our true origins. Through the USOKS research outreach, we have connected with many independent researchers that have brought their pieces of the puzzle and put them on the table. The internet now allows us to connect across the oceans and continents in seconds, and we have to say one for us finally. We win against the wall. But our campfires are designed to create debate and share information and views that are many times rejected by the mainstream. So I asked myself what culprit could hide in plain sight that could help us fill these holes in understanding the depths of our timeline, that that something that would bond the fractures and give us reasons for our failures to link these layers of time correctly. And along this long slithering word surfaced, and once I learned how to spell it, I learned how to pronounce it. And that was catastrophism. And that was the answer that rose as to what would link so many of these possibilities, so many of these major events that were so bad in the past. All we have is these little fragments we have that's been passed down from the early beginnings of time. And, I'll step off my soapbox here with a quote from Jesus Camara, my friend here down there in Peru. He says, "Science to this day in the third millennium can't satisfactorily address, much less explain, our human origins." So thanks again for tuning in. This is the second show on catastrophism. And I would like to pass it on over to Robert and get his definition here that he had for us the other day. So it's off to you, Robert.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, and welcome again, everyone, to the USOKS Campfire Chat. As Bob said, the second in our series, covering this very wide and very deep, and that is an intentional pun subject, which is called catastrophism, catastrophist studies. As we kicked off the first show, one of the things that we wanted to make sure that we level set for the discussion and everybody's understanding as they listen to the various individuals and the research that we're going to present, what a good definition of catastrophism is and what it really means. And you can hear that at the beginning of the first show, which I think Bob has linked to the USOKS Facebook page, to one of the many USOKS Facebook pages. And it's a great show with a lot of very good subjects that were covered across the spectrum that is known as catastrophism or catastrophist studies. The key thing about, I won't go into the long definition that I covered in the first show. I'll try to give it more of a summary so that we can get right into some very interesting correlations with our guest tonight, Gary David, and some of his research that he's done on the Pueblo people in ancient Southwest America. So let's just make sure that we have a good foundation on this concept of catastrophism and really what it means. And it goes back to some research that was done back in the 1700s and 1800s, where the initial geologic research that was done and archaeological research, they were looking at different layers of strata and geology, and they were trying to come up with what they thought would be a definition of geologic processes over time. And that essentially gave rise to what was known as uniformitarianism. And the uniformitarianism was basically describing a very regular and smooth and paced cycle of events over geologic history, over Earth's history, wherein there were regular, again, paced and very smooth transitions between ice ages, either glacial or interglacial, the tectonic separation of the continents in the form of what's known as the old Pangea landmass, and islands rising, seas lowering and rising, and so forth. So this uniformitarianism view basically took and said that all of those geologic processes happened at a very regular pace and smooth intervals. And then they started finding some anomalies. They started to find things that didn't quite fit this smooth-paced scenario. And the things like the floods. One of the things that we'll be interested in, to hear what Gary has to say, how the potential of the Great Missoula Flood that's been identified in the upper North American continent, how that may have affected some of the ancient peoples that were here during that time. But it was a massive flood that happened literally within weeks, and there was so much water that it essentially just carved and created canyons, changed the geologic landscape of the Terra from basically up in western Canada all the way down through into the southwest. They also started to find layers in the strata where there were lots of occurrences of dark layers of volcanic material. They started to realize that there were major events that changed terra firma in significant ways, and it not only changed the land surfaces, but also affected the and even the climatology throughout Earth's history. And this gave rise to what is known as catastrophism. And the concept is that over a period of time, catastrophic events have shaped the biological and ecological life on Earth in ways that have been extremely profound. And we, in our previous show, discussed how a lot of these different events are recorded in human history and stories, myths, legends, and those are recorded in ways that are not just oral traditions that have been passed down or in written, but most importantly, I think, and this is something that we'll be getting into some in this show tonight, and on the symbolism of what our ancient ancestors actually carved on rocks, wrote down on paper, carved into whether it's the rock strata itself or into animal bones or into various types of materials that were available to them at that time. And the symbolism is highly important because, at least in my opinion, I think that symbolism is one of original languages that were used throughout humanity. Symbolism is something that everybody can understand and relate to in today's communication amongst ourselves, in that we have generic symbols for start, stop, go, colors, and so forth, where there is no words that are needed. You see the symbol, you see the sign, you know what it means. Of course, that also applies to interpersonal symbology as well. which people will see in cases of road rage, etc. Um, but that is essentially what catastrophism and why it's important. We got into this subject in greater detail on the last show when we briefly touched on, which I know we'll get into in more detail in the next shows coming up. But in some of the records that we have of not only the current Holocene era that we're in, which is essentially since the end of the last ice age up through present, we see that there were a number of civilizations that came and went. There have been some geologic discoveries that have indicated that there were some extremely strange and very powerful events that have happened over this last 12,000 years, essentially, that caused either the end of current civilizations, the Mayans come to mind, and or the rise and or fall of other civilizations, particularly in the European theater as well as down in the African continent. But it's also very evident in other places around the planet. Indonesia, all of the Indonesia's, Micropoli and Indonesia, all around that region. Across the Indus Valley is another great example of apparent catastrophic type event that happened to the cultures during that time. But we also touched on prior to the last ice age. As we know, those of us who have been studying and following the finds of human history, Göbekli Tepe, a recent find over the last 10 years, is just basically changing the entire paradigm of the timeline that we have been spoon-fed, for lack of a better term, as to what the actual evolution of human culture and civilization has been. And we postulated that at the end of the last ice age, it was really more, as opposed to the way it's been presented by orthodox and mainstream science, which has been that we went from hunter-gatherers and came through this last ice age, and then civilization flourished. We look at it as it's most likely, or more than likely, something that was more along the lines of a rebooting of civilization. Because when you have examples like Göbekli Tepe, you have Yanaguni over in Japan. You have a number of undersea ruins and finds of civilizations that obviously existed tens of thousands of years ago that were highly advanced, that have now been subsumed by the rise in the ocean levels and sea levels as a result of the melting of the last ice age. So we postulated again that these civilizations go back much, much further, and the records that we have found to date, as well as the speculative research into some of these finds, indicate that these civilizations go back potentially 100,000 years or even more. And there is a regular pattern in the symbology, in the language, in the mythos and the legends of catastrophic events that occurred with each one of these civilizations. So that is the a basic and probably long-winded view of catastrophism and why it's important and why we think, as Bob said, there are many, many layers to the entire history of human civilization. And they seem to be interspersed with events of catastrophism, catastrophic events that changed the paradigm of whatever social experiment and or order that was going on at any given time or place around the world. So, with that, what I'd like to do is our guest tonight, Gary David, is an author, an independent researcher, and a gentleman who has put together a series of books that is focused on what he has found in the American Southwest. His first book, The Orion Zone, Ancient Star Cities of the American Southwest, published back in 2006, was focused on describing the pattern of the Hopi villages and ruin sites and how they mirror the constellation Orion, which is a constant theme that we seem to find across, again, human civilizations around the world. We find this mirroring of the heavens and the cosmology, as above, so below. And in Gary's book, The Orion Zone, he covers a great deal of research that he's done in that, which we will get into as well. He's got 3 other books, Eye of the Phoenix, Mysterious Visions and Secrets of the American Southwest, The Kivas of Heaven, Ancient Hopi Star Lore, and Star Shines and Earthworks of the Desert Southwest. All right, well, we apologize for that little technical difficulty, but in the world of technology, it is a difficult place to be. But now that we have resolved that, Gary David had been talking about some of his research regarding the ancient Pueblo peoples of the Southwest. And one of the things that I know that most of us are familiar with to some degree, but very interested in, is how the ancient people of the Southwest, in their legends and mythos, how they recorded their history from not only a symbolic perspective and the use of symbology, but how some of their stories of the 4 worlds came about, ended, came about again, and ended and went through their cycles, and the link to catastrophism in those areas and those studies. So, Gary, what have you found? What's some of the more salient components of the research you've done as it relates to these ancient mythos and catastrophism with the ancient peoples of the Southwest?
Yeah, sure. The Hopi have these cycles of time that they're involved in, and it's much like the Maya culture down in Yucatan. Of course, the Maya and the Hopi traded. The Hopi exported turquoise down to Maya territory, and the Maya brought up north. They brought up macaws, jungle birds, and jungle parrots. And so, they exchanged information, they exchanged goods, and they both had this idea of cyclic time, that, one world, they're living in one world, and then gradually there's a devolution of that particular world. There's transgressions involved in this devolution, human transgressions that cause just things to fall apart, basically, and to have a state of chaos. This happens with every world until finally the Creator decides that it's time to wrap up the world and bring in a new age, a new world age.
A new beginning.
Yeah, a new beginning, and the world is destroyed in one way or another and it's all linked to human failings, human transgressions.
Behaviors, yeah. It's interesting. You mentioned the word creator, instead of the term God, because the creator in a lot of the southwestern, especially the Hopi or any Native American tribe, of course, all correlates and is very similar to connections that we have in deeper past. It's almost like the echoes, through time that go, especially with the symbology.
Well, sure. The Creator, is expressed in different ways. Some Hopi say that it's the sun god Tawa that is the Creator. Other Hopis believe that the Creator's name is Masao. These are all very old gods that the Hopi worship. But there's a couple main ones that were there during the creation of the world. So the Hopi have gone through a number of different world ages. Like I said, we're at the end of the 4th world now. Many Hopi elders point to different signs, different prophecies that have come to pass. And I don't think we want to get into prophecies because that's dealing with this age now. We want to go back in time, I think.
Right, yeah, but the prophecies are very interesting, in themselves because of how so many of them have come true.
Oh, sure, yeah, there are a number of prophecies. Different elders have put forth different prophecies. The Hopi started to bring forth this material after the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Because the Hopi had a prophecy that at the end of the Fourth World, or towards the end of the Fourth World, there would be a gourd of ashes falling on the earth. And when they saw this happen in Japan, they decided to bring, especially the elders on Third Mesa, there were a group of elders on the Third Mesa that wanted to bring this material to the rest of the world because they realized that a lot of the Hopi prophecies were coming to pass, and this major one of the atomic bombs over Japan was a major turning point, and their decision to bring this material to the world, because before that time the Hopi are very secretive and kind of a closed society. They didn't want to share their cultural heritage with the rest of the world, but they realized that we're kind of at the end of this age, and we had to share this material.
Right. What I find also interesting is the Hopi with this four worlds and stuff. It kind of correlates with other people's research, like the Gameras, Alfredo Gamera proposing, 3 worlds. And also we have James Churchward and the 7 periods of time, So we have these very ancient methods of keeping track of things when it comes to time, layers, etc. The work that you're doing down there with the Hopis, of course, now we know that a lot of their symbology is actually been brought forth from a very, very deep period of time, way before the Hopi came up. The stuff they put on their shields. And don't they do those things called sand writings? Or
that's mainly the Navajo that do the sand mandalas, the kind of resemble Tibetan mandalas in a lot of ways. But the Hopi really are not involved in the sand paintings or sand mandalas the way the Navajo. But the Navajo, of course, their reservation surrounds the Hopi reservation. It's like a ring around the central Hopi territory. And the Navajo are latecomers to this area. They came down. Well, some say, in 1500 AD, they came down from the north, migrated into the southwest, and began to populate the region and interact with the ancient Hopi. The ancient Hopi called themselves Hizatsinom, or just simply Ancient Ones. Their ancestors were called Hizatsinom. The word Anasazi is actually a Navajo word that refers to the ancient Hopi, and it literally means ancient enemies. So the Navajos were thinking of in terms of an adversarial relationship between themselves and the Hopi and their ancestors.
Well, yeah, because when you study the history of how the Anasazi, the ancient ones, became surrounded by the migrations that came in actually from every direction. The population grew down there in 50 years. Unbelievable stress on the lands down there. So,
well, sure, yeah. The Navajo the reservation is huge. It stretches into western New Mexico and into the northwestern New Mexico. And goes all the way to the Grand Canyon, basically.
So Gary, is there? It sounds like what you're saying is what people have, at least from when I first heard about the Anasazi versus the Hopi and some of the other Pueblo peoples from that area is that they were distinctly different. But it sounds like what you're saying is at least from the Navajo perspective, the Anasazi were actually the Hopi and the ancient Hopi. Is that correct? Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah, the Anasazi or the Hizatsinom, that's the Hopi word, are basically the ancestors of the Hopi. And there's been DNA studies done on bones that they found in the Southwest. And they're very much like the DNA that in contemporary Hopi society or Pueblo society. There are a number of different Pueblo tribes in the Southwest. The Zuni is not too far away, Zuni Pueblo and the Acoma Pueblo, and there are a lot of little Pueblos along the Rio Grande in New Mexico. But they're all basically the ancient ones, the ancient people, the Hizatsinu. And the Anasazi, a lot of people have the misconception that the Anasazi somehow disappeared around 1300 AD. Well, that's not the case. They just changed their way of living. They just because there was a great drought in like 1275 to 1300 AD, and people had to shift where they were living to areas where the water flowed a little better. Like they migrated down to the Little Colorado River in northern Arizona. They came up off the Mesa Verde area in southwestern Colorado, and they both went to the Rio Grande in New Mexico, and they migrated down to the Little Colorado River during this time of drought during the late 13th
That was a nasty drought too, because
it was hard, and it wiped it completely changed the way that people were living, because they would get by on intermittent springs, for farming, but they had to have a better source of water when this drought hit.
At Mesa Verde, that's one of the Anasazi, as they say there, were backed up into those corners, into those canyons, and they had to hike their water from the springs at the bottom of the canyons and stuff, the water that was permeating through the sandstone, and carry it back up to the top of the mesas, so that they could grow their food safely, without the Navajo and all the others,
right? Yeah,
and taking their food.
In a lot of cases, they grew their food down at the bottom of the canyon rather than at the top. So in some cases at the top, but they lived kind of on the side of a cliff, kind of like swallows' nest, the little cliff dwellings. Because they didn't want to use up the farmland down in bottom where you had some washes going through and so forth. So they kind of lived, and it was too windy on the top of the mesas, so they kind of lived in between there. And they had a brilliant solar passive heating system with these cliff dwellings. If you ever been to Cliff Palace, or that area, or
go ahead.
Or Navajo National Monument, which is a Hopi, actually a Hopi site. It's not Navajo, but it's called Patatican, and there's another one close by, Keat Seal, and that's in northern Arizona. And they will orient their dwellings towards the sun, so that it would be cool in the summer and it heat up in the winter. So it'd be south facing to get the winter sunlight.
Well, like they're right there.
So is Chaco Canyon a part of that?
Oh, Chaco was a little bit earlier. It started about 850 AD. Chaco Canyon, they started building there. Of course, they were building all over the Southwest. They were building what's called pit houses, which are single, individual, family or clan dwellings, and that's been going on for thousands of years. But they started building.
Is that a part of the Hopi, the civilization as well, or is that?
Oh yeah, it certainly is. Yeah, and some of the ancestors did start to build these pueblos there, these stone apartment complexes, instead of the individual dwellings that they built before. They started building these large structures, and Chaco Canyon is one of the largest complexes in the Southwest as far as pueblos go.
Right.
the main one, Pueblo Bonito, is over 800 rooms in this one place, and yeah, so the Hopi have a definite relationship to Chaco Canyon, and they see it not as they see it as part of their heritage. It's not something in the past and done with, but it's part of their living heritage.
You just brought up something that made me think. Did you just describe actually an evolutionary path of the Hopi people when they came out of the ground? After the Ant people saved them, took them underground, because at first you said they lived in pit houses, which to me sounds like it's a step forward, maybe, from coming out of the ground, but they moved to live in the ground, and then eventually they felt brave enough because whatever was happening allowed them to build up off the surface.
Yeah, it's a complex situation, and maybe I better back up. And you talked about living with the ant people and living in underground caverns, and this brings in those three Hopi worlds that were destroyed in the past. Let me go through the different worlds. During the first world, the Hopi lived in harmony with nature. It was they had an ecosystem that was harmonized with all the animal life, and they were practically everyone was a shaman back then. They had shamanic powers during the first world. And
do you have a time frame for that, Gary?
Robert, I'm working on this now. I have an essay that I'm working on that I'm trying to correlate different time periods and cataclysms that we know about, like cometary impacts or meteoric impacts, solar plasma events and so forth. I'm trying to correlate that, and I haven't quite got it, finished. Because it's hard because the Hopi don't speak of different. They're very vague about time. The Hopi are masters of space, and the Maya are masters of time. The Hopi thing is, it happened a long, long time ago. They're not too specific about, but I've been trying to correlate the different cataclysms, the global cataclysms that the Hopi talk about.
I'm just curious if possibly they go back into at least during the last ice age and possibly even into the previous interglacial period coming up to the last ice age. I would think that they at least go back a good 10, 12,000 years, but I'll be real interested to see what you come up with as you correlate that.
Yeah, my initial research shows that around 10,900 BC there was something major happened, some kind of there are a lot of theories about what happened, and different people have different theories.
One of the latest things that came out around down there, Gary, was about 12,500 years ago. There was some serious nuclear type explosions. I'm not going to go so far as to say they were nuclear bombs, but there's some major nuclear explosions somewhere in the vicinity, and I agree with that 10.9 to 12.5 range, because all the evidence is showing the extinction in North America happened right in that time frame.
There's a lot of
one of the articles that posted last show, Gary, was about the possibility of a comet causing the North American die-off around 13,000 years ago. It correlates from I want to make sure we get you back to the four worlds. But just as a aside, the end of the last ice age happened, and this is another catastrophist theory that has a great deal of mapping evidence to it. It appears that there was some type of extraterrestrial cometary or asteroid-type body that did cause the meltwater pulse 1A and 1B, which were the two significant events that pushed the climate from the last ice age into this interglacial Holocene that we're in now. And during that time, there was 130 plus megafauna that became extinct, that quite possibly the ancient Hopis during their first world may have been actually interacting with and living side by side with.
Well, let's bring this point out also. The DNA tests that they've done on the Hopi, they have linked them to the Mongolian people. So one of the things is we know that more than likely the Hopi did not come from the Southwest America. As a matter of fact, I think they have a myth, some kind of myth on arriving there on the leaves of palms or something.
Well, let me go, because my new book, Stars, Shrines, and Earthworks of the Desert Southwest, does provide some information, some genetic information that links not only Mongolia, but the South Pacific with the Hopi. And some very interesting things, linkages there. For instance, albinism is very high in the South Pacific. And believe it or not, the Hopi and the Zuni have a very high rate of albinism.
Really?
Yeah, and one of the highest in the world, in fact.
Wow.
And, you don't notice it walking around the Hopi, because the Hopi are, 12, 15,000 people, so you don't see them everywhere, but and they tend to stay inside. They don't go outside in the desert sun, because it's dangerous for albinos to do that.
Yeah.
But with that research, it sparked a little idea that the Hopi came across on reed rafts across the Pacific. I'm getting ahead of myself here, because this is dealing with the destruction of the third world by a great flood.
Sorry, Gary. Sorry, but yeah, let's. I didn't mean to butt in on you there, because it's so interesting, man. But you were describing the worlds. Sorry.
Oh yeah, the first world was destroyed by fire, and as Robert said, a comet probably took it out, or maybe an asteroid. And scientists have found, I was reading that they found these microsphere rules, they call them. They look like tiny, highly polished ball bearings that they found in the soil at that level of 12,900 years ago. And just think about that. That these little tiny ball bearings were pelting everybody, and all the megafauna, and all the bison and the saber-toothed tigers and the camels and the mastodons and the mammoths. They were all being pelted by this stuff, and also what the archaeologists call the Clovis people. The Hopi would say that their ancestors, his Atsunam. And there's evidence that there was a what's called a black mat.
Exactly. We know. Yeah, we know.
There you go, Bob.
It's an organic layer that they think was caused by a growth of algae. An algal bloom just took over right about this time, 12,900 years ago. And after that time, above that level, that black layer, which is about a couple inches to a foot thick, above that, there are no more Clovis artifacts, no more skeletons of megafauna. That's all gone. After
Isn't that Clovis Lutrian line? Isn't that when the Lutrians?
Yeah, that's the break between the two.
Yeah, that's the break. Is so the black mat fits right in that zone. Yeah, the black mat's really interesting. That's the first time I've heard of the algae takeover.
That's a great theory. Great idea.
Yeah, and it killed off so much that the algae could take over and just populate that layer for a while. That layer of time.
A lot of food with the dead bodies too.
Yeah. That's exactly right. They had a lot to feed on.
That doesn't explain. In the same time frame, like we were talking in our last show about the little mammoths, that they're found on their knees with food in their mouth, flash freezing. So
Still standing.
yeah,
well,
so
that might be something else, because the Hopi. Okay, the first world was destroyed by fire. It might be a comet or asteroid strike. The second world was destroyed by ice. Okay, and they're very specific about this. That it was some kind of ice age, glacial times came across the Earth, and there was they describe a pole shift. Actually,
Well, would that be? Would I asked myself this question a few times? Are they describing ice planet Earth? When the whole planet turned to ice, or are we talking about these last ice ages? When they see, that's the part about trying to tell their time. Be able to read their clock on what.
Bob, it could have been something like a very fast ice age, very short, maybe even less than a century. That could have occurred quickly and been gone and not been real easy to record.
Well, and that could very easily have come from a volcanic eruption.
Yeah, there's volcanism is definitely a part of all this, Well,
the pole shift that pole shift that Gary was just talking about was definitely a major event. The magnetic evidence of the magnetic storms that has happened back at that time also. But what's confusing when I'm finding when we are dealing with trying to understand these ancient cultures' methods of taking time. The Mayas, they mastered it for sure, Gary. They had it down. But then you have these different ways of measuring the different worlds and how deep, like in the Hanan Pancha layers of Alfredo Romero, he has 3 worlds, which I don't know if that was just as far as that culture made it. They were only able to record 3 worlds and never recorded the 4th. There's those kind of scenarios that pop up. But who knows how thick each layer is. Like when we go into the church ward research and Narayana, and it describes 7 periods of time. And some of the periods of time were kind of short, but some of them were very, very long. So, some of those long ones could have been 10 million years long, or even more. So that's what's the confusing thing about trying to understand these ancient cultures and how they kept time.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Different cultures are going to say different things, but they're all saying basically the same theme, the same motif is woven through all of this. It makes it hard because there have been a number of different pole shifts which could have caused different ice ages. Charles Hapgood said that there are basically 3 different pole shifts. One between like 8,000 and 75,000 years ago, 80,000 and 75,000 years ago. And there was another one between 55,000 and 50,000 years ago. And the most recent pole shift, he believes, is between 15,000 and 10,000 years ago. Okay. And the third one might correlate to, what the Hopi are talking about when they talk about the end of the Second World being destroyed by ice. And, scientists call this period the Younger Dryas. 10,900 BC to 9,700 BC are some of the dates that they give for this cold period, this cold snap.
Right. Well, now is that the one you're talking about, Robert? The one in between the 2 meltings?
Yeah, there's a strange. It's strange in the sense that it doesn't meet with any of the classical geological or climatology studies or the way that they want to present it to us, and that meltwater pulse 1A and pulse B, between those 2 was the Younger Dryas of about 1,400 years or so. Mm-hmm. So there was this apparent very gradual and smooth ending to the previous ice age up to about from 18 to 15,000 years ago, Meltwater Pulse 1A starts, and it's an event that is much more rapid than any of the smooth and regular occurring melting that had happened over the geologic period. And a lot of this, a majority of it, comes from the ice core samples that go back about 250,000 years ago in Greenland and about 400,000 years in Antarctica. And there's a very regular period of this glacial and interglacial periods throughout those ice cores. But when right about 14,000 or so years ago, this Meltwater Pulse 1A happens, a massive amount of melting. Apparently the temperatures rose in the tens of degrees, and then there was all of a sudden a return to full glaciation during this younger Dryas. Mm-hmm. So that may correlate to the ending of the Second World that that you're mentioning, Gary, regarding the Hopi. And then after that was Meltwater Pulse 1B, which accelerated the end of the last ice age, and quite possibly is one of the reasons that we see the results of, like, the Great Missoula Flood that occurred, where
and is that along the Columbia River as well? That whole
yes, right up along Idaho. It essentially it comes down. I've got some graphs that show where these various, essentially it was like having like big lakes up on top of the glaciers. Mm-hmm. And you're talking billions of tons of water, and the conveyance that it just essentially broke whatever was holding it in, and just poured down over the western part of North America.
That was over 1,000 miles wide, I think.
Yeah, it was a huge body of water. And then obviously that would have caused, the flooding. They're talking about the essentially an inland tsunami, if you will, and some of the research indicates that the wall of water was close to 1,000 feet high as it came out of this lake. Now, if you can imagine the kind of destruction and terraforming, if you will, that would occur as a result of that amount of water.
It did terraform the whole run. Looks like somebody from outer space on Google Earth. It looks like somebody walked out there with a big old dishpan full of water. You know how you do it in the dirt?
Exactly.
But this thing is big. I mean, it's so big.
And that ties into, potentially the Carolina Bays being some remnants of what may have contributed to either Meltwater 1A or 1B, and a number of other things. But Gary, getting back to the four worlds, I think you said the first world, they said, ended with fire or as a result of fire. The second one ended as a result of ice. Is that correct?
That's right. The pole shifts, and they're pretty specific about this pole shift because they have these legendary figures. They're called warrior twins, and one twin sat at the North Pole, and the other twin sat at the South Pole, and kept the Earth rotating properly. But at the end of the Second World, the Creator said, you warrior twins, you should leave your stations. And they left their stations, so the Earth's axis was thrown out of whack because the twins were not, keeping the world rotating properly. This is all part of the legend, it's a mythological system we're talking about, but it keys in with the scientific idea of a polar shift.
Exactly.
That Hapgood, talks about. But,
see a lot of physical shifting.
Physical shifting, and, this brought on the Ice Age, and it's very clear that the Hopis say that the Earth froze solid during that time.
So that has to be the first when we turned into the ice planet before the Ice Age that we're talking about now. I mean, the two separate ice worlds. When the Earth turned to pure ice, that was a long time before the Ice Age that we're talking about. So are the Hopis telling us that they were here when the world was completely ice?
Well, I don't think there's a simple scenario to look at it. There might be this idea of an ice planet very far back in time, But as we saw, very recently we had during the Younger Dryas we had this ice age, this cold snap. It's called a stadial, technically a stadial, and then the normal periods are the interstadials. But the Hopi, talk about this the planet, the planet freezing and the shifting of the axis. It's all very specific in the way they describe the end of the Second World.
Well, to be honest, I can't wait to even get even deeper in connecting more of Gamera's research with the Hopi, how they're describing this.
I'm sure it's very much similar, because most tribes have this idea of a cyclical, it's going the linear time frame, but most tribes are cyclical, I have a Hopi friend that says, I think that, the Fourth World is going to end pretty soon, probably in my lifetime. He's about my age, and, the Hopi ceremonies will stop and we'll transition to the Fifth World. And, they're kind of philosophical about it. They think that, well, we're going into a better time. We're filled with chaos now. It's called Koyaanisqatsi, Life in Chaos. According to
that phenomenal movie by I think Philip Glass. Have you seen that?
Exactly. And there's I think 3 in a series of movies that they did with the Philip Glass.
When I first saw that back in the 80s, I was mesmerized.
It's an amazing movie. But Koyaanisqatsi is what we're living in now. They just turn on the TV or look at the internet, and you see a world in chaos.
Exactly.
And it's all right there. And
so how did the Third World end, Gary?
Well, the Third World ended in a great flood. The first 2 worlds, during the first destruction of the first 2 worlds, the Hopi ancestors were taken down into caverns under the earth, and they survived in caves in a cavern system. And they have what's called the ant people, the Anu Sinum, they call them, and the ant people helped them survive these 2 world cataclysms. And today on the reservation, there's the ceremony coming up in February called the Pawamu. It commemorates the time that the ant people taught the Hopi how to sprout beans inside these caverns in order to survive. Yeah. Okay, so during the first 2 worlds, the Hopi went underground. Now, during the destruction of the Third World, the Hopi said that they went across the ocean on reed rafts from the west to the east. And they came across, they went island hopping, essentially. They stepping stones from one island to another until they came to the North American continent. And in my new book, I talk about the currents that the Hopi used to go across the ocean. They're called counter currents, specific counter currents. And flowing from the west to the east, going right across just a little bit south and north of the equator are these counter currents. And you could go. It's like a conveyor belt in an airport.
Exactly. That's
and you just get on this current and you just zip down across the ocean. But I think they made it to the shore of South America and then migrated, or perhaps Ecuador, that region, and then migrated up, maybe on foot to along the Sierras in Mexico, and then up the Colorado River. And they came out at Grand Canyon. That's where the Hopi emerged from.
Right. Well, I studied those currents pretty good. I studied them for a couple of years. You have the Antarctic circumpolar and all that. But you're absolutely correct about there at the equator, right? About how the currents, one runs from the east to the west and one runs from the west to the east. And then in the one in the center, I think it runs from the west to the east also, but it's real strong. But the southern one, you're talking about South America, that current there, I've been working with the Strongs a little bit, and we've been trying to connect, because of what we found down there that connected Peru, about the southern route that these people also took. And they could do it very easily just by following the currents. They're strong enough that, with a little bit of sail action and maybe one of those crab claw sails, they could zip across those expanses pretty quick and very fast. But on the northern side of it, where the Hopi could have come from, which would have been down through Indonesia, across through the islands there, and then they started hopping, say, from an island like Man Maydal or something like that, where they could to make.
In fact, Bob, I have an article in the new WEX magazine, World Explorers magazine, and it's about the Hopi links to Non-Madal. So if anybody's interested in getting a hold of that magazine, it talks about a city called Kawatklapi. I think I'm pronounced that right. The Red City. And there are links that the Hopi have with the South Pacific, and like I said, I found some genetic links as well as linguistic links. All sorts of links, plus the idea that their mythology talks about going across the ocean on reed rafts. Now you got to look at the Hopi people. These are desert farmers now, but they have this myth about going across the ocean on these reed rafts.
Well, really, Gary, it just falls right in with what Churchward presents in The Lost Continent of Mu. I mean, when you look at the Hopi symbology and you compare it to the known writings and stuff from Mu, it's amazing. I mean,
it's parallel. Yeah.
So, this has been my theory for quite some time, that the Hopi, they did come across at the time when they were actually called Maya. They were actually called the traveler from Mu. So we're going way back to when they were doing the reed raft thing across the Pacific.
Well, in fact, I talk about this in my book that Churchward, went to New Mexico. I don't know if he went to the Hopi per se, but he went to New Mexico and visited some of these tribes, and he said that the symbols from Mu were exactly like the symbols he found on the cliffs, the petroglyphs that the ancient people carved here in the Southwest. The symbols
they're there.
Were identical.
That's one of the things that I quit listening to the mainstream. That's one of the reasons why I did when it come to that, because the symbols are all there. The evidence is right here. It's right in front of us. It's just together and accepting the truth. I mean, they sailed the Pacific back in the day when they said they couldn't do it. Actually, they sailed all oceans back in the day when they said they couldn't do it. But
that's right. Yeah.
That was a long time ago. Quite a bit long time ago. But anyway, sorry.
Gary, I'd like to ask you about, this is all really tying into some of the ancient models of human history that we've been discussing in the USOKS, and how the catastrophism relates to the various events and even the migrations. I can see a tie between these four worlds, going back to maybe the fire could have been related to the Toba eruption back 80,000 years ago, then into the ice ages, then into the flood over the last, particularly the last flood at the end of the last ice age. As the flood mythos, is one of the most common that we see across all of the various cultures around the world. But I'd like to find out what your thoughts are, particularly since you have studied this, the cosmology of the Hopi, as it relates to Orion, and what link you may see in the star patterns and the cosmology of their mythos as it relates to these four different worlds that they talk about.
Well, sure. I got into this because, I had read Robert Bauval's book about the Orion Mystery, and, he presents the idea that the pyramids on the Giza Plateau are, reflect the belt stars of Orion. Clearly, there are different views to the contrary. Like Andrew Collins believes that it's not Orion's belt, but it's Cygnus, which I kind of doubt. But I had just read that book shortly after I moved down here to Arizona, and I started going up to the Hopi Reservation, and there were the three primary mesas that the Hopi live on now. And the mesas are about 7 miles apart. And, I thought it just kind of, I was driving up to the reservation and kind of idly thinking about this. I said, well, maybe there's an Orion correlation right here in Arizona. And, I put that at the back of my mind and went up to the Kachina dances and watched them. And then came back home and I got out a sky chart and I got out the map of Arizona with the ancient ruins on them. And I saw that there was a 1-to-1 correlation, not only to the belt stars of Orion, but every major star in the constellation had a correlation, a terrestrial correlation, on the Earth of a specific ruin site or Hopi village that was currently inhabited by the people. So, this 1-to-1 correspondence really shocked me, in fact, that not only, the Egyptian Orion correlation is not nearly as complete as the Arizona Orion correlation, where every major star is represented by a village that the Hopi ancestors had built. And this is amazing. And I began to study each one of these ruin sites, going around to them. And the fact that the Hopi, they see the constellation Orion, they call it Hotamcom, it synchronizes their major ceremony of the year, which is the winter solstice ceremony. The winter solstice ceremony begins when Orion appears in the overhead hatchway of the Kiva, which is a kind of an underground communal prayer chamber. And that's the signal that this solstice ceremony should begin when Orion appears in this overhead hatchway that they gain access to the chamber. So there's a lot of mythology involved with these star ancestors. A lot of elders believe that they got their knowledge from the stars, from the star ancestors that came down here, and in the form of various kachinas.
Now, is there have you noticed any correlation between the position of the kivas and the cities that you're mentioning for the mapping out Orion to any particular time frame, like Schock and Bauval and even Hancock has done? Is there any time frame when Orion was in that position that is correlated at this point?
Of course, it's kind of hard to visualize, but Orion makes an arc across the sky, and if you're standing on the Hopi mesas, or let's say one of the mesas, and you look in the wintertime, you look to the south, and you'll see Orion at the meridian when it crosses the meridian, the highest point in the sky. And it's a mirror of the pattern on the Earth. You're looking towards the head of Orion, which is technically Walnut Canyon by Flagstaff. It's the head of Orion on the Earth, but you can see this reflection. And of course, I know what you're saying about the way Orion shifts up and down through the ages in the sky, in relationship to the horizon. At certain times, it's higher up in the sky as it goes across the sky from east to west, and say in the age of Leo, it was very low on the horizon. I realize that, but I don't think the Hopi take that into account so much. These long swaths of time as far as Orion is concerned.
Yeah, I was more interested in what it meant as far as possibly providing, some kind of linear timeline from that perspective.
Well, there are so many different kivas in each village. A number of kivas in each village. So it's very hard to coordinate all that. And of course, in Chaco Canyon, there are scores of kivas all across, honeycombed into the building itself. So it would be very hard to coordinate all of that. So a lot of the buildings at Chaco Canyon have been oriented towards the solstice, sunrise and sunset, and the lunar extremes. There's an 18.6-year cycle, a lunar cycle that the moon rises and sets farther north and south on the horizon. And they kept track of all this, and they oriented a lot of their buildings to that. There was a documentary some years ago that Robert Redford did for National Geographic. And he talked about these buildings that are oriented towards, for instance, the winter solstice sunset or whatever, and all these buildings have a certain axis that they're oriented to, and it's all celestially arranged.
Fascinating. Now, in the cosmology of the Hopi, you had mentioned that the way that they have presented each age was essentially whatever happened during that age was from the impetus of the Creator. Mm-hmm. Is there any cosmology that wrapped around that Creator, defining or describing the Creator and or what we know in the Judeo-Christian stories of the heavenly host, if you will? Is there any reference to any of the stars, any comets, planets, any of that you can share with us?
Well, the Creator is kind of a general, like the Great Spirit. The Lakota Sioux have the idea of Wakantank, or the Great Spirit. And it's a rather kind of a vague thing. The Creator is not anthropomorphized, or but there are other figures that were born or emerged after the Creator. There's a very significant sky god called Sotuknang that in fact directed the Hopi via a particular star moving across the sky to the ant people. And Sotuknang, there are legends of Sotuknang coming to the people and coming down in a craft, in a extraterrestrial craft. We can get into that. But there are different gods and goddesses. Spider Woman is very important to the Hopi. And Spider Woman, helps the hero in his quest through different journeys. The Spider Woman is a goddess that whispers in the hero's ear which path to take.
Or spirit, kind of like a spirit guide.
Oh, sure, yeah.
The spider grandmother.
It's kind of funny because the Hopi are very practical people. Usually a hero would go into the bushes to relieve himself, and then the Spider Woman would crawl up on his ear and whisper something in his ear while he's relieving himself. So
that's a little.
Well, would it be safe to say that Spider Woman was in a different age than the ant people?
No. In fact, Spider Woman was one of the initial. In the initial pantheon, there's the Creator. Some call him Tawa, the sun god, and then there's Sotuknang, and then there's Spider Woman, which basically formed human beings in the four races out of mud and saliva. The Spider Woman's saliva mixed with mud formed the human being. So there are a lot of other
Clay, here we
creation.
go back. Here we go back to the mixing the dirt with the juices, so to speak. And I'm a little, I guess, upset. Not real upset, but I was kind of hoping that the Hopi, when they would be speaking of the Creator, that they would have echoed another thing from Mu, and that would be Ra. That's the one word that I did expect some trace.
Well, if Ra means a similar thing that the Egyptian Ra, it's kind of a solar deity, then certainly.
Well, see, the Egyptian Ra, though, my research is really just another echo in time from the Ra from Mu. Because another story you told that the Hopi share with the Mushin story, and also it's echoed in the Bible, in the religious texts and stuff, is that God came down and destroyed man, or he wiped him out as much as he felt was deemed necessary, because they had turned and became, deviant and lazy or whatever stacked up. On the scales for, a mass extinction of humankind. But, you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, sure.
I'd like to ask Gary what he thinks about, now that you brought up gods, sort of how the wall art, that the Anasazis have drawn, and, some has been found that what he thinks, how that might sort of fit into that God category.
I'm sorry. Is this David talking?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
You say the artwork,
Yeah, some of the archetypes, the wall art that we see.
You mean the petroglyph, the rock carvings?
Yes, the petroglyphs.
Well, that's the major way that the Hopi have communicated these specific beings, and I've seen petroglyphs of ant people, where they have the antenna sticking out of their heads, and just really striking things. And I've seen
mainly archetypes, then sort of not describing. What do you think about actual alien encounters or something like that?
Well, I think that's a touchy subject because
sure.
we have the ancient aliens theory that these extraterrestrial beings come from another part of the galaxy in mechanical craft of some sort and, visit the Earth. And I'm not quite sure it's that simple. And, the Hopi say that they are in touch with these celestial beings, but they're not necessarily, coming in physical craft across the galaxy. They might be interdimensional.
Right.
Or they might be time travelers or something. But, I think it's a little more sophisticated than the nuts and bolts theory that, the Ancient Aliens program tends to promote.
So you think it might have a more spiritual aspect?
Yeah, it definitely is, because, it's woven into their whole ceremonial cycle, the Kachina cycle. And, you've probably seen the Kachina dolls that the Hopi carve. And these are basically not for tourists, and though now tourists buy them. And of course, there was a terrible auction in Paris that was selling off a lot of Kachina dolls.
That turned out in a positive way.
And also Kachina masks, which is it's a horrendous thing to think about. Yeah. But these Kachina dolls were basically carved in ancient times to instruct the children on the various different spirits that come to the Hopi. Because there are like hundreds and hundreds of different types of spirits, and to keep all these straight, they had to carve these dolls to show what these spirits looked like. And if you go to the Kachina dances, you'll see different style of masks. Some are more naturalistic. You might have an eagle Kachina or something like that, and others are completely bizarre, and they look like space helmets. They're completely non-organic looking.
Yeah, that reminds me a lot of the Dogon that Robert was interested in there recently. What do you think on that, Robert?
Yeah, and I was just listening to Gary's description of that, and I was hearing echoes of the discussion we had with Laird Scranton regarding the Dogon cosmology, and the way that Laird was describing sounded almost exactly what Gary was just saying as far as the Hopi, the Dogon's interaction with the celestial beings, whatever they might be, and I tend to agree more with what you're saying, Gary, in that it's not a nuts and bolts. It's most likely more along the lines of some type of interdimensional possibility of the way that they manifest. But there's no doubt that there's something that happens, and it's clear that when you have cultures that are separated by, at least geographically, the Dogon all the way over in Africa. You've got the Hopi in North America with a legend and mythos of them coming from the west, out possibly through the Polynesian area, Namadal, coming east to South America. You're separated by extreme geographic lengths and areas, and they have the same type of cosmology. They have the same type of understanding of, they have this connection that came from the heavens, however that's defined. It's certainly not terrestrial, it's more celestial, and the way in which they manifest seems to be very, very consistent. Are you familiar with Laird Scranton's work, Gary?
Oh yeah, I met Laird a few years ago at CPAC, and I've read a couple of his books, and I found his work really interesting. And there are a lot of similarities between. Well, I found a similarity between one of the Dogon masks and a particular Apache mask. Believe it or not, Apache is another tribe in Arizona here, and it's called the Gons or Mountain Spirit mask. And it's exactly like the Kanaga mask of the Dogon. You know, the shape, it kind of looks like a stylized lizard, but Griol and Dieterling connected that whole thing with a swastika.
Hello?
Whoa, we lost some people there, Bob.
I think we might have lost Gary.
Yeah, it could be.
Are you there, Bob?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, it looks like we lost. Yeah, Gary's got some little bubbles.
Yeah.
Okay, we are live at Project Radio Network. We lost our Skype connection. I'm sure they'll, click, get us back. I'm going to try myself here.
You came over and should have.
I was hoping we'd spend a few more minutes on that.
Yeah, because there is in those petroglyphs that are all through western Colorado too, man.
It's so indicative, man. The shapes of everything, the appearance of the figures they drew. It really makes you think hard.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I wanted to involve Gary in that discussion was the fact that Gary and I were on, we are both in a group, a rock art group, and we were having a discussion recently about, because I take the stance that it's not rock art, it's rock writing, and I dropped out, which is very unfortunate.
I'll try to wait.
Could you maybe try and dial him back?
Here. Okay, now
That's Robert's dog.
let me see if we can get Gary back here, because that rock art and rock writing, I have to kind of, I do agree with Ann that it's more, I'd say 90% of it is more of a writing style that has been brought forward.
Instead of a language,
Yeah, it's a writing, like there was one language, there was, if there was one language, then there had to have been one form of writing, and that would have been symbolic.
Now, what do you think, Bob, about specifically the figure? These sort of, like they're in some sort of suit. I don't want to get Giorgio too excited by talking about this stuff, but, what do you think about that?
Well, really, to be honest, just to skim the ancient aliens theory and all that, I don't buy their theory or their version of it because
it's a little tough to digest.
Right, but we're running into too many cultures now, that have knowledge, have like the Aboriginal Dreamtime stories that go way back,
Sure.
of ancient terrestrial connections. Even the Cherokee. The Cherokee are,
Right.
they're in belief along with, now we're finding out through all these connections we're making, they believe they came from Pleiades, and
Right.
that's just one of the other cultures too. So now we have to take into consideration these stories, that are being.
Well, and this is where I think I understand and concur to some extent with the problems that people have with the ancient alien theorists, and I also agree with Gary's definition of it as kind of a nuts and bolts. However, there's one consistent theme across all of these, regardless of the culture, and that is that there are star people. There are people somewhere, somehow came and had contact and provided some type of information, some type of assistance, some type of something that contributed to either the mere existence of the people that wrote the stories, or at a minimum contributed to their knowledge and how they were the techniques, the stories and things that they used in their cultures. The other thing that he said that made a lot of sense is, when you say that the whole nuts and bolts approach of a hard shell mothership or flying saucer or whatever is a little harder to maybe buy, but there are, as he said, there are helmets and things in the Hopi rock language that appear completely non-organic.
Right.
And when to me that goes to the to the nuts and bolts pieces of it. There are these languages through symbology, through the petroglyphs, that show an amazing amount of things that are not organic, that are hard to explain from just sitting in a kiva and doing some ayahuasca.
They don't do ayahuasca.
No, they eat peyotes, right?
The little peyote mushrooms,
Oh, the peyote. Okay, yeah, peyote and
salvia.
But that to me is one of the things that's difficult to dismiss, because you do have you got the one common denominator of star people coming from somewhere, Pleiades, sure. Orion, Cygnus. It doesn't matter. They came from somewhere out there in the stars. How they got here is a question, but there was obviously some nuts and bolts somewhere, or at least they manifested in nuts and bolts if they did some kind of dimensional thing, because the petroglyphs and the symbology show things that just don't make any sense from a natural, organic perspective.
So, Robert, could the catastrophe really be multiple encounters from different alien species, one from Pleiades, one from Orion? Those could be catastrophes for humankind as well.
Well, and this is one of the things that I'd mentioned in the chat, that, we've talked about catastrophism from two major perspectives, one being terrestrial, where you have, volcanic and tectonic type events, including the ice ages and so forth, where you have major floods and so forth, those being very terrestrial. The other component of catastrophism is the celestial encounters, when a major asteroid, comet, solar storm, gamma ray bursts, scalar waves, whatever you want to throw in there, they come from outside the planet and can cause complete planetary scale devastation, especially depending on which side of the planet is being hit by whatever is coming in. The third, which is why I really wanted to understand from Gary's perspective how the Hopi looked at these four worlds. One of the things he said up front was that the Hopi looked at the ends of the worlds as the result of mankind's essentially foolishness, doing something wrong, being out of sync with the spirit, the energy, with Gaia, with Mother Earth, etc. Yet each one of these ended with major, fire, ice, flood, and we're in the fourth apparently. The fire, ice, and flood, as he was describing that, as I mentioned earlier, it seemed like the fire was the Toba, the ice was the last ice age, and the flood was the flood that happened at the end of the last ice age.
Basically.
That could be
was
because
the biblical flood.
The Toba, extensively, I have looked at that from every angle, and I'm going to have to say that had to have been a key incident, and it coincides now. It strings right along with the fire, ice, and water.
Right. So I'm looking this on the third component of this catastrophist study, and catastrophism as in general as a topic, is this piece of the human component, the human caused, and we see things both in the Atlantean myths that, according to Plato and Solon, who got it from the Egyptian priests, etc., that, the Atlanteans got full of themselves and were...
It's another story. It's another one of those stories that is echoed over and over and over through time, whether it be the Atlanteans, the final days when they come running to the Ramu, screaming for the Ramu, save us, And
right, and then of course you've got the Mu legends.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's the Mu legend. And according to my research, there was a world before that, Lemuria, but the Mu is the one that really echoes through time. Just about everything that comes out of Mu is being mimicked elsewhere. The Roman Catholic Church is actually, their hierarchy and everything is built on the premise of the way it was in Mu. They have the Pope now, who is acting as this Ra. So we're seeing echo through time, and what it is filling those pieces in between what we do know. And this rock art stuff that we're just talking about plays a major role in us understanding the layers and how they, you know what I mean?
Right, and one of the things that I had mentioned in the previous show that was it's considered some very speculative research, and I'll get into that in the next show in more detail, but that research said that the Toba eruption was the result of that particular civilization going after some deep mining to generate energy, which let's just say that for conversation's sake that's a possibility, and that's plausible, and I actually think that it actually is, but that to me would fall into the category of a human caused catastrophe.
Right. Yeah, that would be fully human.
Well, even that story right there is another echo of what happened to the Atlanteans to some degree. Is they tapped into some energy
exactly that's
that
my
was
point.
Bigger than they were, and it took them out. So, as we know, we're still just waking up from this amnesia. So this chain of events seems to get smoother
right now
over the last few years, especially when we do add Mount Toba into our equation, which actually could be just the very tail end of something much bigger. You know what I mean? So, but in our brief linear timeline, I'd say it's very safe to go back to that 75,000, 80,000 year mark.
Well, sure. Trying to harness power from a volcano or doing anything like that's going to be catastrophic.
Well, they're doing it in Iceland, So that.
Now we are.
Yeah, now we are, but we probably learned how to, how to add in. Excuse me.
Well, all of this
safety features,
geothermal and all that.
Right, and to me, all of this just speaks to some of the ancient knowledge and technology of that was more organic in the sense that there was an understanding of the energy of not only the Earth but of the cosmos and how to harness that. Tesla, I think, was one of the most recent people to actually rediscover a lot of that natural energy that exists, and I think that our ancient ancestors, for whatever reason, were much more in tune with that. And it's written about in just about every culture that we find. And I think, are we not going to get Gary back, Bob? Is he gone?
I've tried quite a few times to pull him back in, man, and I can't. But Gary's going to be on. As a matter of fact, we're going to unfortunately have to wind down just a little bit here. Got about 8 minutes, but Gary's going to be on because the stuff that he's bringing forth, it connects. I mean, it connects with Laird. It connects with Laird Scranton's work on the Dogons and all that stuff, and it's also connecting with some of the stuff that we're finding down in Carryong, which is in Australia, of course, with the strong team on the Carryong glyphs. We're finding that. Well, I researched church work for quite a few years, and the one area that I stumbled into in the book was when he brought the research into the Southwest United States, and I started seeing the symbols, and those symbols just, they point and they drip of moo. So, Gary's going to be on, and we're going to try to build a better picture of what was, and we're not sure how far back it was. It could be pre-Toba, or it could be post-Toba, and that's part of the hard part about identifying these catastrophic events on when they happen, and was it an inertia effect from a larger event, or was it a random event selection? And Gary, he was talking about he was trying to compile this list of things that would connect, along those lines, and it's very hard. And the only way, as we learn to identify and see these things a little bit better, then we're going to see the depths. And the Toba event is definitely, instead of it being AD or BC, it should be BT and AT, before Toba and after Toba, because that was that was the big.
Yeah, I like that, Bob. That's pretty good, man.
That was well said. Yeah.
We're gonna redefine it. I agree. Let's do it.
And that's what we have to do is to find that trigger. And I think we have with Mount Toba, because the times and all the inertia events that would have happened after Mount Toba blew, that would explain everything that's pretty much happened to us.
Well, and they experienced that too, Bob. That was something that happened right around them. It wasn't something that just came out of the sky and blasted everybody. They were able to sort of watch it work up to it.
When you get into the oral histories, throughout Indonesia and all those places like that, they all have a myth and a tale about a day when the noise was so loud that it would actually cause people's heads to explode, right, to bleed from the ears, nose, and mouth. So we're talking about a major event, which could have been Toba.
Some serious telluric currents coming up there too.
Well, the thing is too is we're going to have Jack Churchward on here also more this month, a couple times, and he's going to help explain what James was trying to do in the book The Lost Continent of Mu, and explain the methane pockets that used to be underneath the Pacific Ocean.
Like the gas belts, you mean?
Yeah, gas. Well, these, yeah.
Donnelly talked about those as well.
Yeah, well, and these gas pockets, they still exist, okay?
Sure they do.
But now they're in, lands like Peru. They're global, but they're in places that you just don't expect them to be in. And actually, they're very volatile and dangerous. You know what I mean? Because if something triggers those methane belts and pockets to blow up, we're going to have something that is on the lines of what we describe as the Mount Toba eruption. So
basically, you're going to an asteroid coming in. Something that wouldn't be really that significant. if it hits the right place.
Right, and that's what it coincides with what Gary was saying. Is the first world was destroyed by fire, and it coincides with the church ward stuff because the Star of Baal supposedly fell out of the heavens and hit Mu, which we're not quite sure of what they meant by the Star of Baal. It could have been a comet, it could have been a meteor, it could have been a Death Star, from Star Wars. We don't know.
Alan and the Lair, they called it Phaeton, and so did a lot of other societies. So there could be a little something to that comment.
Yeah, yeah. But see that, and that's what we're actually piecing together more and more and more since our first show is 2 years ago. This deeper contact into the layers that go way back further. Once we get Jan Peter on here and we start talking about the Gamera research and see how it fits in with Gary Davids and the church ward and Laird. I mean, how all of this is going to work and together, and that's what we're trying to do in this Catastrophism series, is create that picture using not just one theory, but theories from 3, 4, 5 reputable researchers that spent their lives. They spent their lives putting this together.
Yep.
And
a lot of people read Velikovsky and they don't even begin to get it. It sort of talks to them a bit, but Laird really broke it down well, so I'll be looking forward to hearing what he's got to say on the matter.
Absolutely, I agree.
Yeah. Excuse me.
And what's this subject about rock art?
That would be Metallica painting something.
You rotten buggers. That's it. I'm not playing it.
Am says she's not playing. She's putting on her snowsuit. She's ready to go outside.
I've got some yard art. My dogs just came in.
Yard art. Oh, is it a bit rusty?
It looks like Gary might have popped back on. But anyway, guys, we're down to 2 minutes, and another excellent show. I think we're helping to define these catastrophic events a little better.
Well, I think, Bob, one of the real important things is tying all of these different cultures throughout the timelines that various researchers, as you mentioned, who've spent decades looking at what the ancient peoples said about their history and about their knowledge, where it came from, and what happened to them. And it's interesting, you see, you got the Mayan periods of worlds and times, you have the Hopi periods of times and worlds, you have this same thing with the Dogon, with the Egyptian, with the Sumerians. There is
it's connecting them properly, and I think right now we have a few cultures in there in places they don't belong. They're in the wrong position in the layers. You know what I mean? They're placing themselves in layers that they either were not there or it was another layer of being. Another layer of earthling, let's say.
Yeah, it's one big ice cave.
Exactly, and
and this is where something like the two major points of catastrophism in the celestial and the terrestrial events. These are things that are independent of the cultures. They happen to terra firma, and if we can tie them, the various cultures and their mythos, to these physical events as more clarity comes forth through the research on the geological and archaeological side, and we can see where, the last ice age is pretty clear. That's fairly recent in the timeline that we're talking about, and being able to tie some of the mythos to this Holocene period that we're in, so that we can say, okay, this potentially is where the Hopi second world ended with the ice. This is where the flood myths seem to coalesce. We can start getting a picture of the geologic layers and plugging in the cultures and the various humanoids, because I think that there's there's much more to the humanoid side of it than there is.
I call them myself. I call them the mankind's. You know, 'cause there's no way. There's no way that we are. Maybe now, but
Because of men.
yes, we were different kinds of men, and like you said, humanoids, and I think we're a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that. Well, and I think that the humanoid component also goes off-world, and that is another component that is something we can look at as we go forward.
That's a good way to put it. I mean, how long does it take a humanoid to live on the Earth before he becomes Earthling? Right?
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it happened, when the first one was here.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But anyway, on our next show, we're probably going to pick it back up with Gary David again, okay? And we'll pick up on some of the lost information that we weren't able to share this time.
Like Anne's information.
And Gary's just sent me a message, and he was using his older computer because he really isn't familiar with his new computer, and the old computer overheated on him. So, but we'll bring him back on our next show on the 16th, and continue forward with this, so we can see if we can get a better picture as the weeks goes on here into the series. Before we do completely run out of time, I really want to thank Bobby Kay and his Project Freedom Radio for bringing us this opportunity to talk about stuff that a lot of people don't really think about because they think it's over their head. Well, the thing is, it's really not, because there's a lot of us out here now trying to really bring a clearer picture of what is going on and what did on a basic level. We're not trying to spin anybody's head or anything with this information. We just want people to know it, because it's the USOKS belief: if we don't know our past, we're not going to know our future, and by knowing our past, we can know what to expect in the future, and we as a global unit can do something about preparing for it. And we know it's coming. It's right around the corner. And catastrophism is something that can be beaten to some degree. So thanks again, everybody, for coming in. And until Bobby pulls the plug, we can go ahead and just keep on chatting.
Maybe we should talk a little bit about some artwork.
Some art. It's specific.
You guys go ahead and talk. I'd like to thank you, USOKS, for coming over to Project Freedom Radio Network. We're looking forward to some more programs from them. Looks like just about every Thursday night we're going to have it. Next Thursday, I think it is the 16th. Yes, 16th of January. And the poster will be below the chat, so you'll be able to see exactly what's happening. And you'll have the times and dates coming up in our schedule at the top of the page, coming up shows. Thanks again, guys. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you very much, Bobby. We'll see you there.
Thank you very much,
Bobby.